Hello and welcome to a very special edition of the Colts Cover 2 podcast. We are live at Malnati's in Broad Ripple on Ferguson Street. Obviously, the Colts are playing the Bears this week. Malnati's has the deep dish pizza, authentic taste of Chicago if you're looking for it. Bears fans or Colts fans, either one if you're looking for the taste of Chicago. We're out here doing the podcast. Getting a chance to take a look at it. This is actually my first time being here. It's a nice little setting. You're kind of in a neighborhood. I kind of like it when restaurants are like that. And they got all kinds of stuff. They got all kinds of stuff in terms of what you can do on game day. There's Malnati meal deals. They start at just under 10 per person. You can get them for 2, 4, or 6. Carry out or delivery. You can get some pizza while you're at the games. We obviously can't do that. We're at the press box, but. No, if you're at home watching it.
That's why you get some today, though, so I'm looking forward to it. Malnati's was a go-to for me when I lived in Chicago for 2 years covering the Bears. So this is sort of like reversal roles. They're coming to town, and we're here at Malnati's.
The Bears coming to town, this is an interesting – we're going to start with the run defense, which has been kind of the thing that's been the worst part of this Colts team so far on a consistent basis. So I tweeted this the other day, but Chicago Bears running backs through the first 2 weeks of the season – have 31 carries for just 71 yards. DeAndre Swift hasn't really done anything. Their backups haven't done anything. The flip side of that is that the Colts' run defense is exactly the defense you want to face if you're struggling like that. I think they were at 350 yards or something like that in terms of running backs so far, because there's been some quarterback run and some wide receiver run to get to 474. I want to give a bunch of my followers on Twitter credit, because when I tweeted that out, I got like 8 people who said it's the case of the very stoppable force versus the extremely movable object. What do you think? How do the Colts fix this?
It is a problem. To put it into perspective, they've allowed 474 yards rushing. The next worst team has allowed 399. And that's the Carolina Panthers. And when you're that much worse at something on a football field than the Carolina Panthers, you have a very big problem on your hands. So I think the solutions are going to have to come in many different ways, because the biggest help you have in solving that just went on injured reserve, and that's DeForest Buckner. And we know Grover Stewart is an elite run defender as well, supposed to be, that has not played out because teams are running away from him. But DeForest Buckner is the one that can theoretically solve some of those stretch runs. He's done it so much in the past where he's penetrated through. He's got the length to bring a ball carrier down while he's doing that. So to not have that guy who wins against double teams and makes plays like that, everybody else is going to have to step up while you just have a bit of a hole in the middle. And so I think number one thing to me is the linebacker play has to be so much better than it's been. Zaire Franklin and E.J. Speed, it's hard to explain exactly what's going on with them, but when you talk to people around this team, that's the number one thing they're counting on, that those guys are supposed to be stalwarts. Zaire Franklin, 2 years in a row, has led this team in tackles, set a franchise tackles record. E.J. Speed broke out last year. They rewarded both with contracts, and they've got to be the guys to just put an end to this. And they're getting caught on blocks too much right now. They're getting carried by ball carriers. So at some point, there's just, as simple as it is, they're going to have to put a little bit of pride into this and answer with their pads and kind of send a message that they're not going to get pushed around, because what's happening right now is when it's at this level, teams are salivating to go up against them. They find it funny and fun to be running the ball on the Colts. And as long as you have a team in that place, they're going to keep going at it. And as long as they keep going at it, that's where it just kind of snowballs. And so one of those linebackers, both of those linebackers are just going to step up and clean up for other players right now. And then over the course of time, other things need to get better as far as, play Dayo Adingbo more. I think that would help. Set better edges, get Kwity Paye back in the mindset he was in last year a little bit than just all about rushing the passer. The cornerbacks have got to get off blocks too. That's been a real big problem with these young cornerbacks. So everybody's got to get a little bit better, but I think the guys who need to take the biggest leap are those two linebackers.
Yeah, Grover Stewart, just in terms of talking about DeForest Buckner and how they're going to replace him, had a hint today. It's like a very small little thing where he said guys are going to have to be used to playing in some different positions. My initial thought is that the most obvious guy to move around is Dayo Odengbo. He's somebody that Chris Ballard has said over and over again that they drafted him in part because his body is a lot like Buckner's. He hasn't played. He's been kind of getting second team reps. He hasn't gotten a ton of third down pass rush, like the pass rush snaps that you'd expect him to get. I would say that that's probably a mistake, just based on the way he played last year in itself. But to me, that's the most obvious thing is Dayo Odengbo into Buckner's spot. You do lose something on the end, but you also gain something back in terms of athleticism. I think the other thing that you could do is you could play, Raekwon Davis in more of a 3 technique spot if you're trying to move some stuff around to add somebody for Buckner. But the problem with that is if you rotate them out, you have what we had on Sunday where you've got Green Bay going up against a tackle tandem that's Taven Bryan and Tommy Adebawore.
Yeah, and offenses right now can do hurry up to keep those defenses on the field. It's like they're just compromising some of their personnel groupings right now. So yeah, you would like to think probably at one, keep one of those nose tackles on the field and have somebody else. If that somebody else is Dayo Odengbo, I think that is the way to go. Right now, what's been really troubling for them is when it's somebody other than that, and it is Taven Bryan or Adetomiwa Adebawore. Those guys are just not built to handle this at all. And what's tough is, we've been asking them to play them less, but now they have a big hole there with DeForest Buckner. So, I don't know. I mean, you got Tyquan Lewis. He can move inside a little bit. Maybe you have him split some of those reps with Dayo on the outside. But the edge setting is really where this is falling apart because opponents are getting around the tackle, and then they're getting up to these corners who are just not getting off blocks at all because I think these are young corners who are focusing so much on their assignments in coverage and trying to get better in coverage, and they're just getting stuck on blocks there. So you got to keep them from having to be the answer. So yeah, there's got to be something happening on the edge that can force people back into those big nose tackles, and then those linebackers have to make authoritative tackles and not just try and drag people down as they're running.
I think that's the biggest thing that's maybe not been talked about is there's such a focus on the defensive tackles because Taven Bryan has never really stopped the run well in his entire career, and Adetomiwa Adebawore is a guy that they drafted as a they've converted him to 3 technique, but he was a defensive end in college, so there's a lot of focus on those defensive tackles, but the bulk of these runs, I actually thought the one time they were okay in Green Bay was when they were going up the middle for the most part. A lot of the creases came on the perimeter. That's the only thing about moving Dayo inside is that you're dealing with that's a defensive end position that hasn't done enough against the run. I just think you still want to have that athletic presence because right now teams are running away from the middle anyway. And the thing Buckner gave you when he was healthy is he can stretch more than most defensive tackles do sideline to sideline. With Odengbo, I think you get that more than you get it with, say, like I said, putting Raekwon Davis and Grover Stewart in there together. And on top of that, then you have the issue of those guys are going to have to play together against teams that are, frankly, just going to run the ball until it gets stopped. We got some – Lou Malnati's is coming through for us right now. They just brought out a salad and some wings. The food's getting here right now. Kind of makes me want to just let you go while I eat.
Well, I was going to say I may just get really distracted here. Yeah, well, you pointed this out on Sunday. It felt like the best drive they had defensively was when Dayo Odengbo kind of took over for a series in there, and that's the player that they need to pull out. That's the guy that wrecked the game against the Patriots last year, and they haven't wanted to play him. They're playing him some, but he's down to 41% of snaps, which is only barely more than Taven Bryan. That's been a huge, huge problem for this team. So I think they've got to just live with Dayo, play him a lot. And then, another guy that's just going to have to play immensely better than he has so far is Raekwon Davis. He was the one defensive addition in free agency. Colts gave him $7.5 million guaranteed because that's how much they valued that backup nose after they watched pretty much this team over the past 2 years. Anytime Grover Stewart's off the field, they cannot stop the run. So the idea was bring in Raekwon Davis, who's got the height of DeForest Buckner and the weight of Grover Stewart, and let him kind of plug the run there too. Something was been off with him when he missed that time in training camp, almost all the training camp with high blood pressure, and then I just haven't seen him make much of an impact out there at all. So that's really got to be the difference. It's players have to just play to levels they've played at before in their careers, and that's Raekwon Davis, Kwity Paye, Grover Stewart, Zaire Franklin, and EJ Speed. That's like 5 different areas where if those guys, they don't have to do something more than we've seen them do in the past. They have to do what they've done in the past, and if they can do it together, that'll get the run defense at least to an average spot. I don't know how it could possibly become great without DeForest Buckner, but for the next month or however long they need to go without him, they've got to get it to a spot where they at least get off the field. They've got to get their offense back on the field.
Yeah, Zaire Franklin today I thought was interesting. This is the first time we've heard him say this, but I know the other day he had the quote that was a little bit confusing about how the defense or how the Colts grew up on Sunday against the Packers, which I do not think is necessarily the way fans experience that game was them growing up. But today he took a different tone and was saying that, one of the biggest things for him was, I have to be better. He put it on himself. And realistically, he's right. He is supposed to be the guy making most of those plays in the running game. That's what Gus Bradley's defense is set up to do, a string of guys who, like Franklin, kind of took big steps forward at middle linebacker when they got to Bradley's defense. Are guys like Franklin who in the past have been able to mix it up and play in the run game. He hasn't done that yet. I did think it was important to have him kind of take some responsibility for it. But you also, let's just be honest, you baited him a little bit today. Mm-hmm.
He almost took the bait. Well, I was asking him about, this is the thing, is that we know they're going to talk about how they have to get the run defense better, and we're working on this and we're practicing on this, and there's many different things that are going to go into how they fix it. But on a basic level, I do think some of this is about pride. Some of this is about these linebackers and these other run defenders not getting pushed around and not letting offenses smell blood in the water whenever they see them on the field. And so what I was asking him about is 2 straight weeks an opponent has come out after the game and more or less mocked the Colts for their inability to stop the run. Stephon Diggs said something that I am not allowed to repeat on this podcast, but talking about his offensive line, said they dropped their you-know-what on them. Our
editor's right here. You can ask him.
I think I already said no. Yeah. I think he's vetoed that once before, so I know what I'm wading into here. And then last week it was Jair Alexander said that this is going to be the easiest day of film they've ever had because of how little that they have to even be on the how little he has to even be on the field because the Colts can't get off the field. And he said he just chugs Gatorade and has fun watching it. So Zaire caught himself. He said he was about to say something about one of them, and then he's sharp and realized that you can't talk until you perform some, and they've got to get this flip back. And so you got to think that after 2 weeks of this happening, they're an 0-2 hole. They're back at home. This has to be the week. If it doesn't happen this week, it might be too late to fix much of anything. If you fall into an 0-3 hole, and even if we're talking in 5 weeks from now how the run defense got a lot better, the story of their season really is that it cratered before it even could get going.
Well, I think the other thing is, unlike last week where, I was kind of saying on this podcast right away, the Packers can do some of the same stuff that the Texans did in terms of getting to the edges, throwing a lot of different looks at them. The receivers getting involved in the run game. We kind of watched some of the Chicago game the other night. We were podcasting during it, that kind of thing. The Bears don't have the same reputation for a diverse, creative run game. Mm-hmm. And so maybe that helps a little bit. It seems like the linebackers have been playing a little bit slow. Bill Belichick. So this is right before we get done with talking about the run defense. This was an interesting thing. Bill Belichick said on McAfee's show the other day. He really just kind of, took a dig at Gus Bradley and said that he's all about execution. He doesn't do anything different. The fronts are pretty much the same. It makes it too easy on the offense. The interesting thing about it wasn't that Belichick said that, because that makes sense to me. Belichick has kind of always been the complex type of coordinator as a defender. what was interesting is that when we talked to Gus Bradley, without bringing up Belichick's comments, Bradley said, Bradley was asked about, does his defense need to get more complex? And he felt like that was part of the problem on Sunday, and that the linebackers actually needed to be more simple so they weren't thinking as much.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it honestly, this is a team kind of grasping at some straws right now to find solutions to this. It is reminiscent early in the season to what the offensive line went through here 2 years ago, and so that time they were trying anything. They did all these different combinations, and so I assume after 2 straight weeks of this happening that there is going to be some clear changes to the approach, to the type of players that they're using, the spots that they're using them in, as Grover Stewart hinted toward. But there is a part of this that is as simple as the guys have to execute better. I know everyone wants to make it about the scheme, and there's some people teeing off with comments from Bill Belichick and Michael Lombardi about Gus Bradley's scheme, and he's under fire, and he deserves a lot of criticism for the way the defense has played early this year and late into last year. But when it comes to the run defense being this bad, I really think it's more on the players than anything else. They've coached the same defense for 3 years now, and just all of a sudden now these same players, it's just not working at all. And like I said, some guys, I don't know. It's hard to get an easy answer other than the fact that there's not that much adjustment you can do schematically when you're just getting blown off the ball the way that they're getting blown off the ball, unless we want to say stop playing certain guys. And that's another conversation. They keep bringing up 10 defensive linemen a game for their 47 spots. They want to make use of them. They rotate them a lot, and no one's getting into a flow, and they're not playing well together. So I think they've got to, even though they're without DeForest Buckner, shrink that rotation down, play more of your best players, more snaps, and those guys are just going to have to find solutions.
Zaire Franklin, one of the things he did say after the game on Sunday was that that stopping the run is mentality, to go towards your point. The Colts obviously have to be much better on defense. This is, like everyone said, stoppable force versus very easily movable object. One of them has to win on Sunday to get them into a pass rush situation, which we can talk about here in a second. I've been eating salad. You are on the boneless wings. Are you a boneless wings guy?
I am when they're presented to me. Otherwise, I will always order bone in, but I'm happy with this.
Salad's very good. We're at Lou Malnati's in Broad Ripple. This is the dine-in location, but there are 3 other Central Indiana locations, Avon, Carmel, and Greenwood. You can get pickup, delivery, curbside. So on Sunday, if you're in those areas and you're looking for some food, you order one of the Malnati meal deals, bring it in, and you get a chance to eat it. Maybe on Sunday, you're looking for some deep dish pizza to get kind of a Chicago feel to a Chicago game. Nate, one of the other things that's come out of this game is just there's been a lot of talk about Jonathan Taylor not being in at the end of the game. I think when I counted today, it was 21 snaps they ran in the fourth quarter offensively. He didn't play any of them. He only played 29. We can get into Jonathan Taylor needing to be on the field, but I want to start this off by saying, on this podcast and elsewhere, we're not alone in this. We're not unique in this. Everyone kind of said, if Zach Moss is gone, you need to add a better second running back. Isn't that part of the reason that we're discussing this right now, that this has been such a big problem, is that they didn't go out and add somebody either through signing or through the draft who is more capable of backing up Jonathan Taylor than Trey Sermon and Tyler Goodson?
Yeah, no question. If this was a situation where they were taking Jonathan Taylor out in the fourth because they're down 2 scores and playing with Nyheim Hines, and that player was producing and catching the ball and getting, and their offense is moving that way, there would be a little bit of nitpick about, hey, maybe you should still use your all-pro runner who's averaging 8 yards a carry, but there is at least more of a reason behind the values and the specific traits of this other player who's established at them. The 2 players behind Jonathan Taylor in this backfield are Trey Sermon and Tyler Goodson, and they have 0 track record in the passing game. And not only that, but I don't think that that's especially with Trey Sermon, what you would say his best traits are. With Naheem Hines, it was kind of all passing game traits, and then he could run a little bit, but he was a passing down back. Trey Sermon is a pretty classic runner. He's a powerful runner, and when we've seen him at his best, was that game last year against the Steelers and running the ball and wearing a defense down when they kept running the ball. I do think he is skilled as a pass protector, and I had talked to him today for a while about just the different ways he's gone about making that his trait to be able to stay in the league and have a job. But that can't be the only reason that you're using a running back for the entire fourth quarter. So it is on Chris Ballard in the front office for not addressing that. If they really had concerns with Jonathan Taylor and pass protection, which is I've come to believe that's 100% what this was about, is the pass pro and keeping Anthony Richardson upright when they're going to pass so much, then yes, the front office should have gone out and gotten someone more established at that. At the same time, when they didn't, the coaching staff is here forcing that when it's not on the roster. And so we've seen this in a few different spots on this team. And another example I'll give you is when the Colts dress 3 tight ends, 2 of them are blockers, and then throw the ball 37 times. That's not the way their team is built. So there's a bit of a war of philosophies here between how the front office has built this roster and how the coaching staff actually wants to deploy it. And they needed to get on the same page one way or the other. Either go out and get those specific items like pass-catching tight ends and third down running backs, or if you aren't going to have them, then play in the way that those guys are suited to win right now. And I think Jonathan Taylor, that whole situation just goes to show how kind of backwards some of this is, where you have a coaching staff that is, or I should say specifically a play caller in Shane Steichen, who so far he's showing us he's much more about the plays than the players. And that goes back to the fourth down play with Tyler Goodson over Jonathan Taylor last year, and that goes to the first third down yesterday, 3rd and 8. Michael Pittman Jr. is not on the field. And then for the fourth quarter, Jonathan Taylor's off the field because the plays he wanted to run were deep passing plays rather than go to the strengths of the players and let them kind of come out and win this. And so this is a very interesting time for Shane, because if you're going to be that type of coach, it has to work, or there's a lot at risk in terms of how not only winning and losing games, but how those players ultimately feel about not being used. So I'm really interested to see how Shane handles what is, for him, really the first moment of true pressure and adversity, and people looking at him as, hey, you kind of created a problem on Sunday. Do you have it in you to fix it?
So would you say that you're down on Steichen as a play caller? Did Sunday change your perception of him quite a bit?
Sunday gave me a lot of concerns for the first time, and I've been super high on Shane. I thought he was the biggest edge that they had, and when we did our game predictions, everyone asked me, whenever was asked how I thought this team would do, we knew there were some concerns with parts of the roster, but what I kept saying is I thought Shane Steichen could get this team to 7 wins rolling out of bed, because that's what he showed last year with Gardner Minshew at quarterback, without Jonathan Taylor, and just a lot of other stuff that went against a first-year coach, whether that was Grover Stewart's suspension, Shaquille Leonard's fallout, kind of on and on. He found so many ways to give them an edge as a play designer, and I think ever since that 4th and 1 call with Tyler Goodson that didn't work and the season ended, I think he's been in his head a little bit. So I think it's a rut, and I think he can. I still fully believe in his abilities. His track record building offenses around young quarterbacks and getting them at their best is so strong that I'm looking at this as a kind of 3-game stretch of him being in his own head, from the Texans game last year to the Texans game this year to the Packers game. But there's no doubt that, like, if we see the plan that they rolled out for Anthony Richardson on Sunday against the Packers, where they have him drop back 37 times, run one designed run, don't have him on the move, don't use Jonathan Taylor, don't dress pass-catching running backs, and just go deep, like, we're going to have a bust on our hands if that's how he's going to run an offense. And so in that sense, I am on alert for Shane. He's shown us first-time vulnerability as a play caller in a guy running the offense. So I think he's got to get right back to what he was
before that Texans game last year, really just before that fourth down play. A guy who is creative, has some cool plays in his bag, but still is about accentuating the star players that he has and protecting the other players from being in positions they're not built for, regardless of the play design. That's what I want to see from him.
I think Sunday, one of the things, like philosophically, he's always said it's throw to score, run to win for him. And the problem is if you start throwing and you don't score, which I think is part of what happened on Sunday. They came out throwing it a little bit more than maybe I expected. They don't score. If you don't have a lead, you can't run to win. You end up in a position where you're coming from behind, which is where they've been the last 2 weeks, playing from behind. Although I will say this, I don't necessarily buy that they had to go complete pass heavy the entire fourth quarter.
Yeah.
Yes, the Packers had a lead, but we've actually seen the Colts in the past. I can't remember if we've seen it with Steichen, but we have seen the Colts in the past come back by riding Jonathan Taylor. It's not something that they did this time, but you can use the running game, especially when a team is backed off. Like the Packers are backed off there in the fourth quarter. You can put it in Taylor, run a draw, and he might get 10 or 15, which is better than a pass in some of the cases of the shorter throws that you're maybe trying to get going, get moving down the field.
He averaged 8.3 a carry. If you average 8.3 per pass attempt, that's a really good passing day. If that's what they had averaged in the fourth quarter per pass attempt, they might have come back had they not turned the ball over. They can absolutely use him in those moments. It's still their best version of an offense is to get him behind that offensive line, especially like you said, if they aren't seeing it coming, if they're backed off, if they're lightening the box, if they're not reacting to a draw play. But really where that whole thing went off kilter to me was the 3rd-and-1 pitch play. That's kind of what everyone's kind of up in arms about, and Shane Steichen has given some confusing answers. Ultimately, I think that was what I'm getting at with Shane is he drew up that play during the week. They practiced it. They wanted to catch a defense off guard with something they've never run with Trey Sermon before. He wanted them to think, oh, Jonathan Taylor's out of the game, so we're not going to be running it. And here he is trying to pitch play, and it didn't work. But my thing is, if you kept Jonathan Taylor in the game on 3rd-and-1, run him 2 plays. A guy averaging 8 yards a carry was going to get 1 yard on 2 plays. If they get that and they go down and they score, it's a 1-score game, and they don't have to get into any pass-first mode because they would have gotten the ball back in a 1-score game, plenty of time. And so if it did become about passing all the time, it's still because their decision to run that pitch play on 3rd-and-1 is what got them in that space to begin with.
The real stars of the pod today have arrived. There's 3 pizzas in front of us, 3 deep dish pizzas. There's a couple slices.
I'm excited. I'm very excited. This is Lou Malnati's is the best deep dish that's in Chicago. I say as someone who lived there for 2 years, so I'm ready.
Ooh, we have some. I bet we have some Chicago listeners who would give us their rankings. I haven't been enough. I haven't been to Chicago enough.
To me, it's Lou Malnati's and Gino's East is at the top. Gino's East has the cornbread crust. Lou Malnati's has this butter crust that is wonderful. So they're kind of very close at the top there, and then. There's some other kind of smaller brands. Giordano's is the other big one that people know, but I don't think it's in the same tier as Gino's East and Lou Malnati's.
Well, there you go. We're at Lou Malnati's in Broad Ripple, full-service dining room and bar. We're talking about the Colts. We're going to get to some questions that Nate. We're going to start making something a part of the midweek podcast where Nate does his mailbag every week. He gets these questions. And then he can't answer them all because our editor doesn't want to edit 4,000 words of answers to all the questions Nate gets. So we're going to start doing that little bit of that in the podcast every week, and we're going to get there. But one piece of news from today, from Wednesday at the Colts complex, that you've been talking about for a while. Josh Downs essentially said he believes he's going to play on Sunday. What do you think that – I mean, you've been talking about a ton on this podcast, but what do you think that does for this passing offense?
Yeah, well, there's one other piece of news that just came out of Colts practice. Matt Gay missed the practice today with a quad injury. So that is something to watch for. Of course, he's not been making a lot of kicks dating back to midseason last year. It's often been health related. But with Josh Downs, that is the good news. He practiced today in full, practiced last Friday in full. Sounds like he was about 50-50 going into the game. And then they chose to rest him, and they ended up really needing him for a couple different reasons. Number one, we're seeing that A.D. Mitchell is showing some signs of being a rookie. It's hard adjustment for a lot of players, and he's had a tough game on Sunday and with drops and whatnot, but also has had just a tough connection with his quarterback. So I think they're going to mostly replace him with Josh Downs, who's going to go right back in the slot role. Shane mentioned it today, he felt like he's got a really nice connection with Anthony Richardson because those two have thrown the most together. I know Anthony hasn't thrown that many passes, but they showed up at rookie minicamp, tore it up there. They were throwing in a parking lot the night before rookie minicamp, and ever since then, that's been like that one short depth of target receiver other than Michael Pittman that Anthony Richardson's been able to work with. So on Sunday, that's what they really needed. They did not have answers for Anthony in the short and intermediate range of the field. And so not only is Josh Downs good at getting open against man in that way, he also is kind of the guy who's going to alert for Anthony Richardson pre-snap when he motions. It's going to reveal man or zone, and then that's going to help Anthony out. And the biggest thing to me is that Josh Downs is an answer for Anthony Richardson when they face zone coverage. So if you watch what the Packers did, they had a guy in spy to keep Anthony from scrambling, and then they were in a lot of zone coverage, and the Colts don't have short-range answers to that. But now they do with Josh Downs back out there. He's great at settling into zones. He's just shown a very high football IQ. And then he is, he hopes to bring what they missed on Sunday, which is reliable hands. Just too many drops on Sunday, which played into them getting off the field, not getting their young quarterback in a rhythm and confident. And there's just been a lot of talk from talking to players and coaches about how Josh Downs is really built to answer a lot of these problems. I hope we're not putting too much on him that he has to solve everything. There's other adjustments they have to do about believing in the run game, running Anthony Richardson more. But I think Josh Downs for the pass game, especially that completion percentage that is less than 50% for Anthony Richardson through 2 games, I think Josh Downs is going to be a really, really big boost there.
Yeah, Downs also cut his hair.
Yeah,
the long hair
back.
you're used to is gone. He has short hair. He said it was because he felt he had some growing up to do. I'm not an authority on this. I've always had short hair. Is long hair young?
Kind of. It's sort of like he's
our video producer Clark is telling me yes, that long hair is young. Clark used to have long hair. Well, we need pictures. I need pictures of Clark with long hair.
I need to see that. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like you get a haircut for your first day of work. I think this is Josh Downs' first game of work this season. So here he goes. He's ready to roll.
He's got the short hair. The biggest thing I think is not necessarily so much as the biggest thing with Downs is I do think they need some completable some shorter passes. They've also been a lot of those were dropped on Sunday.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing is that when Downs has been on the field with Richardson, we haven't seen it a ton, but when we saw it in training camp, Downs was probably the most targeted receiver through the first week or so of camp, and it was a good connection. There weren't a lot of mishaps. That's the biggest thing. I think there's a chemistry there that maybe he doesn't have with somebody he clearly doesn't have it with A.D. Mitchell yet. Kylan Granson, there's something off there.
Yeah.
Drops, missed decisions on routes, slipping. Something's off there, too. Downs is someone he's always kind of had a natural connection with. I think that's going to help. Anthony kind of tried to downplay it in his answer, but Downs told us that at the end of the game or either in the locker room, sometime after the game ended on Sunday, Richardson came up to him and was like, hey, are you back next week? Because the implication being I could use you back.
Yeah, well, Alec Pierce brought Josh Downs up to me when I asked about a different topic. Said we need Josh Downs back to be that guy who gets our quarterback into a rhythm. And so Alec Pierce is the one other player I think Anthony has I should say one player this season that Anthony has shown a good, stable connection with. Happened both games. Obviously, the huge opener in the the throw that broke all the passing charts. But also on Sunday, Alec Pierce turned in a couple of nice plays, including the touchdown pass. But Alec Pierce's whole game is built to be explosive, low volume, and so that's not the answer to. That's going to give them their explosive upside, but that's not the answer to staying on the field, because Alec Pierce could run for a 60-yard touchdown, or but those are low percentage plays to try and run. You can't run them all the time and be successful all the time. Whereas Josh Downs is like the singles hitter in the offense. He's like the slap hitter who's going to raise the batting average of the team. So that's what those sort of short passes, short intermediate areas, and just like you said, the chemistry, that's really important for, especially when they're facing zone coverage. I think that's what's giving them a lot of problems right now, is that Anthony Richardson doesn't have chemistry with these receivers to kind of read and communicate with their eyes when they're in the middle of a play facing zone. It's a stress on his ball placement and accuracy to kind of fit those windows. And Josh Downs seems to just settle that down. And Josh Downs also is a guy, he's good when he leaves his feet. His hands are super reliable. He's going to bring a little bit more to that area of the field than what even his profile is. So I think it's a big adjustment for them. And so what we need to see out of them, and that's why I put a lot of this on Shane, is that now that you have this short range answer, or option, I should say, to build some of that, like, you need to combine Josh Downs and Jonathan Taylor into a huge part of this that lets them stay on the field, get these singles that occasionally can be a home run, because Jonathan Taylor can do that too, but at least get them to stay on the field, launch these longer drives, and just really pick your moments to go for the explosive plays. That was kind of a big point talking to people around the building this week, is that they feel like they're just getting way too greedy for explosive plays, because we know that Anthony Richardson can throw it to the moon, and we know Alec Pierce can fly it on the field, and we know Shane Steichen loves drawing up those plays, but that can't be all that you are. And so Josh Downs, I think, and leaning on Jonathan Taylor, those are, to me, are the two clearest answers. And then you add in Anthony Richardson, some design runs. Those three options right there is what I want to see this week to kind of build this full picture, where they're explosive, but they're also staying on the field and methodical when they need to be.
Well, I think the other thing, too, you look at the opponent this week. Chicago's head coach is Matt Eberflus, who Colts fans know well. And, in the time Matt Eberflus was here, the thing that made people most furious was that guys who didn't normally complete passes would come in and throw a bunch of short passes and work down the field against him. So this game, more than any other, it seems like you want to have those throws, because Eberflus is going to try to take away the explosive and make you drive the length of the field. I've been thinking about, can Richardson do this? Is Richardson accurate enough to really be able to throw those passes? I'm not convinced that he's at that spot yet, but if there's a drive in the preseason or in training camp that would lend you to think that he can do it at least enough to score some points, it's the first Cincinnati drive. The first drive in the preseason against Cincinnati, short, intermediate throws, very quick, very accurate. He wasn't able to keep it up in that game, but that was sort of the indicator that maybe that's in there, and something that they can tap into more.
Well, my big thing with that is they've got to stack this together. So they need to get one drive like that in a game, and then I just think that's going to get Anthony loosened up and playing in a more comfortable and confident space. What's happening now is he's on the field so little, between them hunting for explosives and going 3 and out, and between the run defense not getting off the field, to where he comes out and he's kind of cold, and like that's where all the mistakes that they do have are crippling them. And they have a penalty from an offensive lineman. When they have a drop, they don't have enough plays for that to just sort of wash away and be like, oh, that happens sometimes in football. Instead, we're always talking about those moments because they ended drives, and they're just not getting their quarterback into a rhythm. And so, I just think it's got to be one of those things that builds incrementally over time, where he needs to see the ball go through the basket. He needs to see the ball get completed, and that's going to create some muscle memory and consistency in his feet and in his release. That's going to get more consistent mechanics, because we see sometimes when he rips some throws, like that throw to Ashton Doolin for the touchdown in the opener, the velocity was outrageous, but the ball placement and the accuracy of that pass showed you that he has it in him. It's like, how do we ever get this thing consistent? Well, you have to, I think, attempt it
consistently. You have to emphasize it consistently. This kid's not just going to fall out of bed. He's not just going to get out of bed on Sunday morning and be that, because he's not that yet. They just have to build it. So that's where I think having Josh Downs back is a big part of that. And what I'd like to see them do is whenever they don't have Josh Downs, or maybe even with him, since we can't just put this all on one player to be the entire intermediate pass game, I like to see Will Mallory play some. Will Mallory showed some things at the end of last year, as a guy who can get open and win in that short to intermediate range. And right now they're only playing 3 tight ends. 2 of them are blockers, and then like you mentioned, it's just hasn't come together with Kylan Granson. They got to get something out of the tight end room at some point. A lot of that should come in the run game, and that's why they should lean into that. But Will Mallory, to me, is one option we haven't seen yet that I think there's a little bit more to unpack.
I still think they need to go for the explosives, though, because we've seen the inverse of not going for it. I know you're not necessarily saying this, but avoiding them altogether, you end up with an offense that has no punch. Because that's why defenses are playing this way now and playing their safeties back, is because it's hard for offenses to score a lot of points when they're going down. That's kind of what people are attributing to a lot of the down quarterback numbers through the first 2 parts of the season. You're not saying that, though. What you're saying is you want to see less of them.
Yeah, I think it's more like I would like to see them build the explosives off the base offense. So if you think about it, if they come out and they are running heavily and consistently and with multiple guys, and it's really stressing defense. Think of the way that teams are playing the Colts, and you get them in a bind, and then all of a sudden, what they need to get teams do is if you keep just ripping off runs like Jonathan Taylor was running, but say like do that on high volume and it's going down and it's scoring touchdowns, they're going to eventually bring one of those high safeties into the box to handle that. And I think that's when you go for the explosives. Or just in certain moments go for a play action pass. Maybe it can be a hurry up situation. Maybe it can be when they've been expecting the run. Go for a play action pass. What I saw on Sunday was so many moments where they just wanted to go play action pass, throw down the field to a team that was already sitting back in a too high shell. And that led to 2 different interceptions, and they didn't get in the end zone till late in the day. So, yeah, I want to see a healthy balance. Explosiveness is a huge part of this. They've got to tap into it when they get a single high look. And even occasionally, again, it's situationally. Like one of the explosive plays against the Texans was a 3rd down play that Alec Pierce caught, the high ball. Like that is a time when it's 3rd and long. It can be the equivalent of a punt at worst. I just think they have to pick out some better moments. Some of the moments where they're trying to get tricky, explosive, different are just too risky right now, like that 3rd and 1 pitch play to Trey Sermon. That was an attempt to do something they won't see coming, and maybe we can rip off a huge gain. And the problem is, like, there's a simple way. That was a moment where, like, you didn't need to look for an explosive. You need to get 1 yard with your running back, stay on the field, and then find a better moment, less risky moment to take the explosive shot. Because what I love about this offense, when they do say, hey, you want to take away the deep ball, we'll throw deeper. They're going to try some of these. And, like, I love it when they pick the right moments, and then the worst that happens out of that is, okay, you found a way to defend this explosive shot. Now it's 2nd and 10. That's a lot better than when it's 4th and 5 on a bad pitch play and your hurt kicker comes on the field and misses a field goal. So situationally, I just think they have to be better.
I do think some of the blame, though, falls on Richardson. Like the first interception, Pierce was open. You got to hit it. Yeah. I know it's a longer throw, but you can't airmail him. Second one, there's a better decision to be made there. He's got to read the linebacker there. So some of this is on Richardson. If the play call is there and he misses the throw, that's more on him, I think, than Steichen.
Yeah, I think that Anthony Richardson he's made 6 starts in the NFL, so we should expect every game to see some accuracy misses, and if he plays enough turnover-worthy throws, at least 1 or 2. You hope it. He had 3 interceptions. 1 was a Hail Mary, so it doesn't really count. But the other 2, you hope it's 1 interception and not 2. But you do need to bake into the expectation that there's going to be some variance. There's going to be some missed throws. He's just the whole. It took Josh Allen 2 years to build accuracy in this league. It took Jalen Hurts.
he was a 52% passer his rookie year. It does take you more than that initial first season, and this still kind of counts to me as Anthony Richardson's first season when he's only 6 games into it. So to me, that's where you can't have him drop back 37 times and design one run call for him, because if you do, what you're asking for is a lot of incompletions and a lot of turnovers.
We are at Lou Malnati's, Colts Cover 2, since the Colts are playing the Bears. Initially started back in 1971. It's deep dish pizza is the signature, the original Chicago-style pizza recipe. I've sampled it. It sounds like Nate's a little bit of an expert in it. I've already had a full slice. Nate's had about half. This is good podcast hosting where you set somebody else up and eat while they talk. This is just for anybody else who's doing a live one.
At some point, you're going to make me pull up these mailbag questions, and I'll look over, and you've eaten another slice of pizza.
Yeah, that's 1,000% what's going to happen.
2 bites into mine, so
that's 1,000% what's going to happen.
I see what's happening.
It's all about the podcast hosting.
That's sharp. Do you want to get into that mailbag?
Yes, it is. It is time to get into the mailbag. Some of the questions that Nate has left over from his mailbag. We're going to start making this a weekly thing here. And I'm going to go for another slice while Nate reads this question off.
You do that. I'm going to try and stay away from a lot of the questions. As you can imagine, what people are talking about is those 2 main topics we've gotten into, which is Jonathan Taylor's playing time and the problems in run defense. And so, rather than repeat all those, I'll get to some of the other ones. But there's one here that a couple of these people are asking the same sort of variation, but I'll read one here directly. Brandon Schofield on X asks, why are the receivers not hustling or giving effort? And there's been several people asking about that. They're seeing some clips. Drops is part of it, but also some other clips where it seems like receivers aren't going for the ball as much or as much as they could. A.D. Mitchell down the sideline, Michael Pittman Jr. on a jump ball in the end zone. So what's your feel on why does it feel like there's something lacking with the receivers?
I think Mitchell's trying to process everything. I think some of that is a rookie who isn't really sure of what's going on with the coverage, how he's supposed to adjust the route. That was kind of the explanation after some of the stuff in Cincinnati. You talked to him on Sunday, so you might have a better idea of it. You had the offense, I had the defense, kind of. Doesn't always break down that way. Sometimes it breaks down that way. Pittman.
See what I did here, though, is I even though I had talked to A.D. Mitchell, I tossed the question to you so I could eat some pizza.
I know, but then you started talking again. Anyway, and then with Pittman, I don't know what's going on there. Pittman doesn't look like himself to me. I don't know if it's just a couple off games, whatever, but he's wanted that deep ball, that jump ball scenario. It wasn't a great place ball, but when juxtaposed against Romeo Doubs and what he did to Jalen Jones, it just felt like that's the time to go do it. Go prove that you can win those jump ball settings, because everyone right now is going to be locked onto Pierce going deep. You're going to have options for those other receivers. That was the chance to kind of show the coaching staff, like, hey, give me more of those.
Yeah, I think the best way I could explain it with Michael Pittman, because I think you're right on with A.D. Mitchell, and that's more or less what he admitted after the game, is that it's an adjustment right now, and he's learning some things. He shared about, he got whistled for a penalty that erased a big run from Jonathan Taylor, and he thought he communicated the right thing to the ref, and he didn't. And these are learning moments, so he's kind of like the game's a little bit faster right now than maybe he expected or is ready for, and they're relying on him a little more than they ideally should, than they would if they had Josh Downs out there. So it's just a rookie being sped up a little bit. With Michael Pittman Jr., it is very strange. The best way that I can sort of try to picture this is that it's a very different style of offense than he was just in with Gardner Minshew, and it is what ultimately he wants to be able to play in. He wants more of those explosive plays, but he can run a little hot and cold within a game based on what his role is in that moment. And so I think they're having a hard time kind of finding kind of a base way for him to operate. So he's getting some targets, but they're almost sort of like balls he's not expecting to come his way, and he needs to be more ready for that. That's going to be some of this. The explosiveness that he's going to get is going to be some of these off-script plays. If you think back to when he used to hit those with Carson Wentz, he kind of knew that if it was a scramble drill, he was still going to be the one to get the ball, because that's just kind of how Carson Wentz works.
If Carson Wentz only trusts a couple things in this world, and he's going to throw the ball that way. And Michael Pittman Jr. was one of those players.
Existential.
Well, you could take it how you want. Could touch on football or non-football things. He like the vaccine. But Michael Pittman Jr. He's trying to work through some of this right now. So here's the example I would give is that like he talked about how he wanted them to run more of their base plays. The same thing I'm saying. The same thing a lot of other people are saying. They had a moment where when things weren't going well, then they in the second half they get across the 50. And it was like at that moment they said, okay, we're just going to throw a slant to Michael Pittman Jr. And he throws it and it's completely covered and it gets picked off. And it's sort of this frustration of like you're forcing the base play. I'm not saying he's saying this. I'm saying how I think it's playing out is that when they are running the plays that are like easy schemed up moments to produce, the defense sees it coming. And they go too long stretches the rest of the game where they're just sort of off script hunting for explosives and he's just not dialed in with this quarterback yet enough to be there. So he talked about today that he has to play better. They all have to play better. They have to catch the ball when it's there. They have to get open. They have to prove to their quarterback that this route concept is going to work. And it's just a work in progress. I think it's just one of these things that's going to happen with another quarterback change. The youngest quarterback in the NFL roster. Not very many opportunities because they're barely on the field. They're not, and then when they're not executing them, they're not staying on the field. So that's kind of my read.
Maybe he's a guy. Maybe he's like a running back who needs lots of carries.
I think so.
Maybe that's part of it. Is he's always been a volume receiver. Who knows? Maybe that's part of it too. It's just he wants to have a lot of catches to get going. What else we got in the Nate mailbag?
That's right. So, well, depends on how we want to take. This kind of goes to that saying a little
You're in
bit
charge.
offshoot.
It's your phone.
A little bit of an offshoot of that question about effort. There's some people have kind of gotten to that point where there's either effort or accountability issues they're sensing. So this one from the username LOL Colts. This person asked, do you get the sense that there are cultural issues in the organization? It seems like questions of effort and accountability have persisted through the Reich and Steichen era and leads me to wonder if this starts up top with the front office. I'll start with this. I think when teams are losing, it's always going to feel that way because there's frustration and it comes out in different forms. And it's like when players talk after games, sometimes it sounds like they're complicit with it. Sometimes it sounds like they're pointing fingers when they're looking for solutions. Usually teams, especially when they're expected to win and then are not winning, it feels a little dark in the moment. And then really we'll figure it out if they turn it around or not, whether or not that was something or not. But one thing when we talk about kind of this feeling of are people accountable enough? Are they complacent? I do think that was a little bit of the risk of running back this entire team the way that they did. They went 9-8 last year, and it was impressive that they managed to do that with a backup quarterback. As we noted at the time, they also faced a lot of backup quarterbacks, so it was sort of like they were up against it in some ways, but they also got some breaks. And it was ultimately, though, it was a solid enough first year out of Shane Steichen, but they didn't make the playoffs. They didn't win the division. They were in a spot where this franchise, I think, needed to say, hey, we're talented enough to contend for the playoffs. We need to take that leap forward. And that's where I think they could have invested in a big-time, starter at like safety, for example. But at the very least, like what we've brought up is bringing in veterans from the outside who I think could offer a couple different things. Number one, they offer some competition to a guy like Jalen Jones or Nick Cross. These different guys fighting for positions. You could put that the tight end room could go the same way. It just adds a little bit of pressure, makes them kind of bring it. But what it also does is it brings these guys who have some different experiences, guys who've been through winning and losing, and have some different perspectives. And I liked when they did that with Rodney McLeod and Stephon Gilmore. And now I know that seems like a bad example because that team did go completely haywire, but it wasn't that area of the team. It was actually, I thought they had a rocky situation in that DB room to start 2022 when they were not playing
coaches were not playing Isaiah Rodgers. They were only playing Brandon Faison, and the players behind the scenes were really having a problem with that, going back and forth. And a big reason it settled down partly is that they started playing Isaiah Rodgers more, but also the leaders of that room got it together, and they'd been in other places, and they won Super Bowls. And I just think they ran back a little too much of this team and sent a message of, like, you guys are already ready to roll. And I think that complacency, I do think, is a factor in why the run defense has fallen off so much, is those were the guys all rewarded and rolled back, and it was almost like we don't have to focus on this as much anymore because we're already great at it, which is really the message should have been, like, you guys are good at this, but we need to level up, and we're going to bring in some other players who can help us do that. So I think there's a little bit of that there.
I think effort's a cop-out. I've kind of always thought this. I think it's easier to say we didn't try hard, or the team that I like isn't trying hard, than it is to come to grips with the fact that maybe they're not good.
That's very true.
I don't think most guys go out there. Part of me just doesn't think that most guys go out there when you're playing, and they're like, you know what, I would love to get embarrassed today, so I'm just not going to play very hard. But more than that, I do think it ends up being like, This happens with good teams too, where like they lose a game to a supposedly less good opponent, an underdog, and then they come out and they say, well, we just didn't prepare that hard. It's like, or maybe you have real problems you need to address in terms of talent, scheme, what plays you're calling, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. I also think it's easy, like you said, this happens anytime a team loses games. Is the effort there? It's worse if they're just not good.
Yeah, for sure. When we talk about effort, I'm not like, if you actually look for moments in games where you'd say, is the effort lacking? I think the one where you could make that case is a couple of those moments for wide receivers. You'd like to see them go up for the ball a little bit more, but that's the only thing that felt like a sign to me. I don't think you're seeing business decisions from guys who are going to tackle. It isn't like an effort moment, but it is. The thing is, though, that when you ask about, like, we don't want to admit they're just not that good. I think that does happen, but with this specific team, it's players who've been good in the past and we're not playing well right now. And so that's where it's a little hard to figure out. Like, we can't just say, like, Zaire Franklin's not any good, E.J. Speed's not any good, because they have been good and they're healthy, and you're trying to figure out why do they not look good right now. And so it's a few different things. I think it's lacking talent around them at times, but it's also those two players specifically, and I'll throw Michael Pittman in here. Pretty much a lot of these guys who've played well in the past and not playing well right now, I do think there's something that's been off with their focus level and their I don't know whether it's chemistry, complacency, attitude, because they've kind of admitted that to a point too. The Zaire Franklin talked today about how it's a mentality and it's an attitude to stop the run, and that's what's got to step up. So it's not like it's not effort in the sense of, like, are you running hard and all this? It's more like all the steps throughout the week to bring this together. Do you have your eye on the ball the way you need to have it and be dialed in the way you need to be? And they're not so far.
It could be that. There also might be a weakness he needs to address in his game that's less about preparation and more about, his skill set.
That's true. I'll give this one to you from Indie Sports Fan. Asks, what is the likelihood of in-season trades to bolster the defense?
Not high. Chris Ballard doesn't make.
Well, that's what I say. He says, I can't remember Ballard doing any in-season trades in the past, but maybe I'm wrong.
The only one is Nyheim Hines, who wanted out.
Right.
And they got back Zach Moss for it, which ended up being way better than anybody realized. But
it was great, but they didn't use Zach Moss. Well, they did use him down the stretch here.
Because that was when Taylor got hurt.
That's right. I've erased 2022 from my mind, so some things will slip like that.
But in general, going out and getting someone has not been his MO. He usually says the prices are too high.
Yeah, well, it's one of these where, like, the situation that they were in the secondary entering the season, and especially when Juju Brents got hurt, I think most GMs would be trying to trade for someone. But those same GMs would have done this differently in the first place. They would have traded for someone because they already went out and got somebody else that they now don't have. Chris Ballard has kind of intentionally made this so that the answers are what's on the roster. So, and I don't see that really happening. See if there's any other questions that we haven't gotten to yet. Well, here's. I guess I could have started with this one. Peter Weber enthusiast asks. He says, "I think I can ask the one question everyone wants to know: what the hell is going on?"
I think the rest of the podcast kind of took care of that. There's stuff they didn't address in the off season, leading to issues through the first couple games in terms of scheme. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on.
There's a lot of stuff going on.
Some of these names are
Like that?
cracking me up. My favorite name though from Twitter from the first 2 weeks of the season is Electric Werecat Truther. And when I asked them what that was, they sent back like a video with like werecats and some part of Indiana. Something we got to get on as a news organization. I'm kidding.
Yeah, I think we mostly covered it. I mean, to get to that question, though, is the broad what the hell's going on. You're wondering why this team's 0-2. Basically, the way I would sum this up is that the model this season was to have a young quarterback who's going to be up and down, and we've seen that exactly play out, where he's had the high moments like those 3 50-yard completions against the Texans. He has the low moments like the turnovers and the completion rate. And it was supposed to be insulated by every other piece of the team being strong because they rolled it back. They're veterans. They've paid for them. And that is not happening in very many places. I think you can credit it. I think the offensive line's playing pretty solid. I think Jonathan Taylor as a runner looks great, and we know he's a little lack as a receiver. But overall, that weapon looks great, but is underused. Everything else is kind of not adding up, where the receivers aren't on the same page. They're not dialed in. They're not being consistent. They can't stop the run. The secondary, when it has its chances, you still have situations where Malik Willis goes 14 of 16. I believe I saw where the Colts have got their hand on 2 footballs this season.
That's true.
So
yep. There's 2 passes broken up.
And so that's the one thing we knew was that was going to be a challenge for them, was holding up in the secondary, making plays in the secondary. That has gone according to plan. It's 2 other areas of the team that we really thought were going to be sharp. The 2 shocking things are they can't stop the run, and they're not game planning very well on offense to use the talent that they have. We talked about those 2 areas a ton on the last podcast, and what I'd said at the time was one of those I do fully expect to turn around, which is the offensive game planning. I trust Shane Steichen. I think they're going to realize the spot that they're in. They're going to get Josh Downs back, and I think it's going to get a lot better. The big question for them is, can they fix the run defense? Can they get it passable without DeForest Buckner? And if the answer to that is no, where do they go on defense at this point? That's kind of where I think this season is teetering a little bit at 0-2, where they've got to figure out, they've got to make some kind of big strides in the run defense, even without DeForest Buckner, or else that whole defense isn't built to work. So that's kind of the big question going forward.
One last question. We're here at Lou Malnati's in Broad Ripple. It's a very nice day. There's a nice little breeze coming through the patio. People are starting to, I think, get out of work and kind of move around. What's your favorite kind of pizza? What did you order here today?
So this is the Lou Malnati's Classic. It just comes with it's a classic deep dish pizza where it's got the cheese underneath and then the topping, the meat and the sauce. And so it's got bits of real tomato in it. It's got the sausage is excellent. And then you get the crust. That's the butter crust here. So I just kind of go with the classic Lou Malnati's here. But we've got a Supreme, and what else did you order?
I'm a Supreme guy. Our editor, I think, has just pepperoni. I'm a Supreme guy. I like the peppers. I like the onions. I like all that thrown in there with it. The more on the pizza, the better, just in general for me. But
Yeah.
that's been this. It's been from Lou Malnati's. We want to thank Lou Malnati's for having us out. Colts and Bears play this Sunday. Great time to get some deep dish pizza. Anytime the Bears are going to be in town. If you're not going to the game. For the Colts Cover 2 podcast, I'm Joel A. Erickson. This has been Nate Atkins. We'll talk to you after the game.